People warned us. They said public schools in El Salvador are underfunded, unsafe, overcrowded, and outdated. Don't put your children in a third world public school. You're making a big mistake. They said the system was broken. They said our kids would fall behind, or worse, never fit in. For their entire lives, our children had first world Canadian education, comfort, stability, and privilege. And then one day we dropped them into a country where no one spoke their language. No special treatment, no safety net, no education assistance, no friends, no comfort, no familiar culture. But what they didn't see is the resilience born from struggle and the courage it takes to stand alone. In Canada, our kids had everything: technology, comfort, language, privilege. In El Salvador, they had nothing familiar. And that was the point. This year taught them more than any curriculum ever could. This is our children's first year in a school the world fears. Most people run from a place like this. We ran to it. Buenas tardes, mis amigos, y bendiciones para todos ustedes. Good afternoon, my friends, and blessings to you all. My name is Charity Hagenars, and bienvenido a mi canal if you're new here, y bienvenido de nuevo if we're already old amigos. Si no habla inglés, ve a la configuración de YouTube y selecciona pista de audio para escuchar este video en español, o presione el botón CC para obtener subtítulos en español. When we left Canada, we thought we were escaping something broken. But maybe we were really chasing something real. Our kids grew up in comfortable classrooms, surrounded by perfect textbooks, endless resources, and rules that wrap them in bubble wrap. But comfort doesn't build courage. So we did something no one expected. We put them into a Spanish-only public school in El Salvador, a place outsiders love to call poor, dangerous, and uneducated. And on the first morning watching them climb onto that rattling microbus, we questioned everything. Would they be bullied, lost, forgotten? Would this decision break them or forge them into something stronger? People back home said that we were insane. They warned us that, a third world school would be chaotic and unsafe, academically behind. They assumed our kids would lose opportunities and fall behind without English supports. But here's the truth. You'll never find it in a Western brochure. The systems we worship can smother independence, creativity, and grit. Here, our kids had to listen without words, speak without fear, and navigate conflict without hiding behind adults. There are no million-dollar facilities here, no education assistance, there's no IEPs, but there is something we didn't know that they were missing: resilience, community, and identity. The ability for them to stand alone. Maybe the real privilege isn't what we left behind. Maybe it's what our children are learning to carry on their own. 1 year later, they are not the same kids we brought here, and neither are we. But that's just our perspective as parents. The real story belongs to the kids who lived it. They're the ones who faced the fear, the silence, the laughter, and the loneliness of a language they didn't speak. So instead of guessing, we asked them to tell you honestly what this year was really like. No sugarcoating, no filters, just their truth. And yes, you might think my daughter suffered a lot this year, but I can tell you she has grown very strong. Maybe it doesn't appear that way in the questions I asked her in the video, but I see a major difference in her. And we are going to be working over the summer break, working on their Spanish skills so that next year is just that much better. Enjoy the interviews.
On the first day of school, I felt not really overwhelmed, but a lot of people were curious because it's a new person, native English speaker, very unique. It didn't really continue out throughout the months, but I'd say the first week, there were definitely a lot of people interested about what I had to offer, I guess.
On the first day of school, I felt different. It was very different from my old school. And people were very friendly there. They were quite nice people.
What surprised me most about the schools in El Salvador was, a lot of it was different. It was different from public schools in Canada. The teachers came to the class and the class stayed in the classroom. It was more like a private school in Canada. Another interesting thing was the equipment, like the desks. They were all drawn on. They weren't really respected as they would be in Canada.
Of how nice the people are. Compared to Canada, people are very rude. At school, there's more bullies, but here, I don't see bullies at all. There's a lot of nice people.
What surprised me the most about school in El Salvador was basically nothing. It's the same as in Canada. They just speak a different language.
The hardest thing to understand was pretty obviously the language for sure, specifically the teachers. Some teachers would just say the instructions. The others would write stuff on the board and use Classroom. Those were okay to understand. But teachers who just spoke vocally, especially there was this one teacher who didn't even have a paper for the exam. He just listed off the questions and you had to write them down. I just could not understand.
The hardest thing to understand was Spanish and math. I'm not really good at it, but I'm trying to understand Spanish more. When I learned more words in Spanish, I understand people a bit better.
The hardest thing to understand was Spanish. You socialize to learn Spanish faster.
I knew very basic about Spanish. I knew how to say my name, my age. I don't think I knew how to order from a restaurant or anything. I now know a significant increase from what I learned before, but I'm not really at a competent level yet, I don't think.
I didn't know any Spanish. I only know a few words like hola, ¿cómo estás? Bien.
I knew nothing about Spanish before and after school.
What's different about classes here than in Canada is a little bit of everything. Starting with the people, I feel like the people here are a lot more nice and compassionate, I guess. They were a lot more helpful than kids in Canada. They would be outgoing. People in Canada, they would keep to themselves, and if you asked them, they would help, but they wouldn't recognize that you were struggling and then help you. They wouldn't be the first to ask, I guess. People here, they are significantly more helpful and a lot more nice.
Better education in El Salvador than Canada. Canada didn't have the best education, if I had to be honest.
The thing different about classes here and different in Canada is gym. They have it outside. I do not like gym.
What I like here better than Canada is probably the people, for sure, and not really the environment. The environment's just different. Not really better or worse. It's cool to be able to go outside the classroom and just be outdoors.
The people are really nice. They always want to come up to me and say hello. My old teachers, they were the most nicest, and my classmates were absolutely rude in Canada.
The thing I miss about school back in Canada was friends.
It was sort of the same making friends here than in Canada. Not in the exact same way. People in Canada, they kept to themselves, but people here, it was just the language. People would love to make friends with me, but I just didn't know how to speak their language, so it's very difficult.
It was easier to make friends here in El Salvador than Canada.
I'm having a hard time making friends. I don't speak Spanish.
In Canada, kids were acting very mean. They would say whatever they want, but in El Salvador, they're very polite, very respectful, and they always try to greet me and make me feel special.
The kids at school in here are mean, boys and girls.
My teachers were, most of them were very understanding. They wrote stuff on the board, they used Classroom, specifically the math teacher. She didn't speak any English, but it was still easy to understand her, probably because it is maths and maths is a universal language. But, however, other teachers, like the one I mentioned before, didn't use Classroom, didn't write stuff on the board. And in the first 2 months, we had an English teacher. He was probably the best teacher, in my personal opinion, because he spoke English. But then, after that, he didn't show up, and he was replaced by a new English teacher who didn't speak English. And she was significantly harder to understand because she was one of those teachers who didn't use Classroom or didn't write stuff on the board. And yeah, it was basically impossible to understand her. She was teaching us English, but really poorly. Teachers here it's kind of a mix of both. They are a bit more relaxed. Some are strict, and some are the same. The teachers that I could understand, they were a bit more strict, but I don't know. And specifically the science teacher, he was very relaxed. He was very a lean back sort of teacher.
My teachers are very nice people. My teachers are more relaxed.
The teachers here don't really care what you're doing in class. Teachers here are like more relaxed and non-caring. I only have one teacher.
There was a cafeteria at some point, the like middle to late throughout the school year. People would bring in a Little Caesars pizza, but then there was an announcement in the group chat saying we couldn't do that anymore.
At school, it could be porridge, it could be rice and beans, or just rice, and it could be pupusas as well, very big ones. I like the pupusas, I also like the rice, I also like rice and beans, like as a sauce, really good, yummy.
What I eat at school is only chocolate milk. I have a friend on the bus that buys me chocolate milk.
The recesses and break times are very short. They're just like 10 minutes. A lot of kids just leave and grab a snack from the cafeteria, or they just sit around outside. It's good to have just even any break just to go outside, get some fresh air, and stretch your legs. The teachers had to come to class, so we would just be sitting in the same class for like 2 hours, I think. It was 40 minutes per period, and we had 8 periods in the day. Yeah, 2 breaks.
In recess in El Salvador, you go out to play soccer and maybe basketball, or just getting food at the cafeteria.
The recesses and lunches are the same in Canada, except you either pick one to eat your lunch or play outside. You only get 2 choices.
The craziest snack I've seen, there were a lot of unique snacks, but the one that I can name right now is dried plantains with a spicy sauce, like a red spicy sauce.
The craziest snack I've seen a kid bring to school was 3 sandwiches.
I was most frustrated during kind of the end of the school year, specifically at the social studies teacher. He was the one that didn't use Classroom, and he said the questions instead of writing them down or giving us a sheet of paper. He wasn't a very good communicator, and it was very frustrating to understand him.
I don't get frustrated at school that much.
I definitely did feel left out because of the language. However, I don't really have FOMO as other people would. I don't know. I didn't really take interest, but I did notice that I was missing out on things because I couldn't speak the language.
All the time I feel left out because of language. I walk around. It makes me feel better. Yeah, music around my ears.
One time when I wanted to play with a group of kids, they said no because I didn't speak Spanish. I dealt with it calmly, and I just went back to my class to draw.
Presentations here, probably because I don't speak Spanish, they give me a small part of the presentation, and I feel like I don't contribute as much as I should, but I still get marked on it, so maybe I can improve on that.
Canadian kids will find it strange that people want to come up to them and say hello, how you doing, and talking to you.
The kids here at school, they share their lunch in recess, and the Canadian kids would find that strange because they get them separate.
This happened like in the last 3 or 4 months, but the principal started doing assemblies in the middle of the school. All of the classes would be in a single file line, and the principal would talk and other people would talk. In the first 5 minutes, they would have 6 people marching, and one of them would be holding a flag, and they would walk down the center of the school marching to the anthem. Something different. And as well, sort of near the end of the assembly, there would be duos dancing, a man and woman dancing to a classic Spanish song. It was very interesting.
Very nice people, very welcoming.
My sleep got worse. I woke up at 10, went to school, got home at 6, so I didn't have a lot of free time if I wanted to play games or even study.
I'm more disciplined what I've said now.
I have changed a bit since I've started school here.
The advice I would give someone who is thinking about moving here and going to school here would be to definitely prioritize the language. It is so important, and you may not think that, but if teachers aren't going to use Classroom or write instructions on the board, you're going to have to depend on classmates, and that was a problem for me. I don't really speak to people that often, so if you are comfortable with going to your classmates every day for the homework, then you could prioritize it less, but definitely prioritize learning the language.
It would be very confusing, and you would need a translator to understand the people. And you also need to learn Spanish. It'll take you a while to understand, but you will understand at some point.
Learn Spanish first before going to school here.
I don't know, this is a personal preference, but I think I do better with homeschooling. There was a week in October where we had to learn online, so all of the teachers were forced to use Classroom to give the work, and I'd say that was probably my most productive week in school.
It's very hard, but I will try my best to understand. I'm doing quite good in literature, I'm pretty sure. Math, not too well.
I don't want to go to Salvadorian school. I would prefer to not be homeschooled. What I would prefer is to go back to Canada or any other English-speaking country.
This isn't really related to school, but in Canada we lived out of the country, so if you wanted to go anywhere you had to go by car. But because we live here now, everything is in walking distance, so I'd say I get out more. There's a gym nearby, and I'm thinking about going to it.
If I stayed in Canada, probably it would be a better year because there's a lot of new people, a lot of new kids, and my old teacher said the year is going very well. St. Luke's, when I was there, it was, let's just say it was not pleasant experience.
In Canada, if I stayed, I would be more confident and more out of my own shell. And I would have more friends.
I arranged the rest of this video into subcategories. You can skip ahead if you like, but I'm going to tell you how it is. It's kind of long, but I'm sure you'll appreciate it if you are thinking about moving to El Salvador and putting your kids in public school here. Number one is safety. Is the school safe? Now, this school is very safe. Our school in particular is right beside a military base, and there's an armed guard at the door. So are teachers attentive? Some of them are. Maybe it isn't like that in all the schools. Lawrence's teacher had reached out to me when there was an issue, as well as Annika's teacher, but Willem's teachers went the extra mile, and we had meetings with them, with all of them in the principal's office. That was a meeting where we found out about the missing assignments in the Google Classroom that Willem didn't even know about. I can say Annika's teacher I was the least fond of this year, and I did speak to the principal about him. We actually tried to move Annika to the grade 5 class, but she didn't want to be there because she had made some friends, although it may not sound like it in her interview, but she had some boy friends and not so much girlfriends. And I think the issue really was to do with this part on bullying, because the question people ask, do local kids bully? Now, she's the only one that really experienced anything, and I have it in the video here. But I think the issue really is that, what I believe is that the boys in the class were very attracted to her, and the young girls in the class were very jealous of that. And Annika mostly has those boyfriends in the class, even now to this day. I think this might be very common with foreigners. The principal addressed it right away when the girl hurt my daughter, because there's zero tolerance for bullies in the school, and it hadn't happened again. And the principal and I actually built a great rapport from our first meeting, where I brought Stan with us to translate, and the principal brought all the teachers into the office to introduce them to us, and all the teachers that were there for the morning class, I guess, because Willem's teachers are in the afternoon, but all of Lawrence's and Annika's teachers were introduced to us before we even started school. The principal and I worked together a lot buying the supplies for the parking lot project, and I'll mention that in a different segment near the end so you can see what actually happened with that. So he was definitely my go-to guy for all the issues we had, and he did address them right away. I think with Annika, I think it is a big part of the jealousy that I mentioned, but the language is going to help a lot. So we're going to be working on that over the summer break here. I know it's November, but in El Salvador, this is summer break. And we have a couple plans to do that. And I will be sharing more with you if one of them comes to fruition. But the other ones are really just doing some online classes, maybe with a couple of ladies that offer to help, but also just focusing on material I use to teach my kids English. I have it translated into Spanish too, so I'm going to kind of go in reverse and work with them over, the break, like 2 hours every day going through the stuff. Lawrence needs to get caught up in math, and for the rest of them, it's just Spanish is a big part of it. Now, number 3, academics. How difficult is the curriculum compared to, say, Canada? Well, we worked with Annika and Lawrence after school each day for about 2 hours for the majority of the year, and helped them keep caught up or get caught up in their workbooks. Now, some of the math that Annika had, she had either in Canada from her homeschooling days or for when she was in grade 3, but there was a lot of it that was new. So I think it was right on par with what we were doing in Canada. And all of the literature seemed to be quite advanced, as she was analyzing poems by the end of the year. And I didn't do poetry until grade 8 in Canada when I went to school. I don't know. Maybe it's different now. I really like how the textbooks were structured as well. Whenever I had questions, I reached out to the principal or the teachers directly through WhatsApp. Now, are standards higher or lower here? I think the school expects the kids to do their homework every day and turn in their assignments the same way they did in Canada. That's no different. And they have almost like homework every day. At least Willem did. Annika and Lawrence were just kind of getting caught up in their workbooks. This may have been something that the kids would have been doing in class, but maybe my kids were just a little slower doing it because of the language. I really liked how the literature books were designed as well, because they had like a story, then there was questions, and I think it was like 3 or 4 pages of just the one item, and then it would move on to the next topic. I really liked how the curriculum was designed, actually. It definitely was not an easy year for them, and not just because of the language barrier. I mean, it was new material, so they were learning throughout the year as well. Number 4. Language acquisition speed. How quickly did they adapt? Well, they do not speak much Spanish around the house at all, so it's a bit tricky to assess that. They use their phones to translate each day in their classes. Lawrence's classroom was near the Wi-Fi at school, so I never bought him a data plan, because when I did buy him a data plan, he used it all up before the month watching videos, so he just had the Wi-Fi from the school, and he was able to use that to translate what he needed to do in school and to kind of keep up with it. They do not dream in Spanish now. So that's what you're wondering. Lawrence and Annika need a lot more work in their Spanish. Willem had Duolingo before we moved here for about 2 years. So he was already a little ahead of the other ones, and I think he's taken more interest in actually learning the language. The other two, we need to work with them a lot. I don't think any of them could hold their end of any conversation, but Willem's definitely doing better than his younger siblings, and we're going to keep working on that. So that's I think our biggest roadblock. If your kids already had Spanish, as my kids advised, you should have that before you come here. That makes a world of difference, because kids are kids, and if you can talk and communicate, you're going to play and you're going to learn, you're going to grow those friendships. Number 5, social interactions. Are Salvadorian kids welcoming? I would say yes, but kids are kids anywhere you go, so there's teasing in every culture, especially as Lawrence has strange habits that make the kids want to tease him about. So there was that. Sometimes on the bus he would get teased. I think they actually bonded more with the kids on the bus than they did with the kids in their classroom, just because they spent like 2 hours a day sitting very close quarters in that microbus with them. My children were not invited to any extracurricular activities or parties with the other kids from school. I don't really think that's a thing here, except maybe a big quinceañera party. Nobody was invited to any of those. I don't think there was any birthday parties or anything like that for the kids that my kids may have missed out on. I don't think that was a thing here. Now, the new Minister of Education. This has been a very hot topic online for the past 4 months maybe. So if you don't know, during this school year, El Salvador appointed a new Minister of Education, and then suddenly the expectations in public school shifted. Behaviors that were once like overlooked became disciplined with intention. We received notices outlining the acceptable haircuts for the boys, reminders to keep uniforms clean, shirts tucked in, belts worn, shoes shined, details that, at first glance might seem strict, but there was also renewed emphasis on manners, which I actually appreciated. Children were expected to show respect to parents, teachers, and elders. And honestly, I love that. I've seen the difference firsthand in the English class that I volunteer to teach each Saturday. Students enter the room with proper greetings and being very polite. And even just walking to the class, I passed by other students on the way. I was seeing that they were growing more in that culture of respect. I really like that. I appreciate that a lot, actually. And at our last parents' meeting, we learned how the discipline is tracked, if I understood it properly with Google Translate. So if a student accumulates 15 demerit points, they fail the grade. But at 14 demerit points, they're given a chance to redeem themselves by asking what they can do to remove those demerit points, maybe cleaning classrooms, helping the staff, things like that. It teaches accountability and responsibility rather than punishment. And Lawrence already came home with his written evaluation, praising his exemplary behavior. Shocking, I know. Something he'll need when applying for high school. Now, honestly, I'm supportive of these expectations. I believe this generation can carry these habits into the workplace, showing up clean, respectful, accountable, prepared. These are things you need in the workplace. I agree. Starting young is the best. These are behaviors that not only help them get jobs, but keep the jobs and ultimately become productive members of society. Homework expectations. Well, there was homework that was due at least each week. Not necessarily every day for all my kids. Like I said earlier about Lawrence's and Annika's homework, we did a lot of it after school. Like they get home from school at 12:30, and then at 2 o'clock we work till 4:30. So 2.5 hours every day, pretty much the entire year. Like we did take some breaks here and there, and we didn't necessarily do it every day if we had to go out. But we did it for quite a bit of the year just to keep them ahead in their workbooks, because they have a textbook and a workbook for pretty much every class. So the textbook gives the information, the workbook is how you apply it. So that was great. We did a lot of that every day. Willem also had homework. Mostly his stuff was done in Google Classroom. So again, we didn't know a lot about every class in the Google Classroom right away at the beginning of the year. That kind of developed as the time went on. So things may have seemed harder for him as time went on because he didn't know about the other work that was due near the beginning of the year. So it's a process. It's not just learning in a new language, you're learning a new system of schooling, because we didn't use Google Classroom that much in Canada except for during COVID when everyone was at home. So it's really used a lot here in high school. Lawrence had to make an oceanic diorama project once, and I had to reach out to the principal, get Lawrence's teacher's information, contact the teacher, what exactly do you want to see in this? So that was kind of cool. He had that project to do. And Willem had a few class presentations as well as group assignments. As he's in high school, it's a little different. Annika didn't really have any of those type of things to do, just regular homework. So supplies and uniforms. I went to several parent meetings in the school this year. And at the beginning, those meetings were really to pick up materials. The first one, I believe, was the textbooks we picked up. And then we picked up uniforms. I think we got some older uniforms first. And then they had measured the kids. And then we got their specialized uniforms after. The older ones, I think, were just left over from last year. And if you didn't have a uniform, like we didn't have uniforms at the beginning of school, we just picked up whatever would fit. And then we were given a second uniform later on that was to measure. And then we also got a math set and rulers, pencils, crayons. Depending on the age, the kids get different things. I think Annika may have gotten crayons, but then Lawrence only got pencil crayons, something like that. There was a big kit that they came home with all those supplies that they needed, pencil sharpener, erasers, that kind of stuff. And then another trip was actually to pick up the laptops. Now there was a whole production with the laptops because the Ministry of Education came in, everyone was kind of lined up. I think we had 3 kiosks where we had to go and then show our ID, and then we would get the laptop, which is a little trickier for my kids because I got to say this was a complicated thing. My temporary residency number is only 7 digits, where the local ID called the DUI, the DUI, that's 9 digits. So my kids could not get accounts and passwords for their laptops for about maybe a month after we actually got the laptop, because they didn't know how to enter my information into the system to give my kids accounts because it was 2 digits short. So they figured it out eventually. It just took a while. We didn't get this until Easter, around that time. So we're a little bit late getting started, which is probably why we didn't know a lot about the Google Classroom stuff, because my kids didn't even have laptops or accounts to get into Google Classroom. Now, all of these things were free. They are included. The thing that we had to pay for is a bus to get the kids to school or other transportation. Parents were also expected to put $10 towards the school lunch program, I guess, per child. I'm assuming that's how that worked. If they wanted to take a test on paper, it's 10 cents a copy. I remember one time I gave Willem a whole stack of dimes for any test that he wants to get in paper. And if he needed to help a friend out, here's some extra dimes, right? So that is expected. If you want to have a test on paper, you need to have the dimes. And as you heard in the interview, Willem talked about how one teacher would just read the questions. If you don't pay for the paper copy, you listen to the questions, write in them in your own notebooks, and then that's what you hand in. You don't have a printed out test paper, which was awful for Willem because of the translation issues. The teacher often would give him the sheet afterwards so that he could translate it. So he was always behind. He always started the test later because he had to wait for them to all be read to the other guys where they're all thinking of the answers, and he's I don't even know what the questions are until he gets the paper and he could translate it. And I don't know if he had to write the questions in Spanish in his book after, but he was always later than the rest because of that little issue. So for the daily schedule, in our school grades 1 to 9, that goes from 7 a.m. to 11:30 in the morning, sometimes 11:45 depending on the day. And then high school goes from 12:10 to 5:50. So Annika and Lawrence left in the morning, and then later on Willem gets picked up, and then Annika and Lawrence come home, and then Willem comes home. He didn't get home till 6:30 sometimes when there was traffic. Sometimes they did leave early because their classes are 40-minute periods, so if there was no class at the end, they would leave a little earlier. And because Willem's in the advanced class for accounting, which you might think is kind of crazy for somebody in a school that doesn't speak the language, but we went to the advanced class because it actually added 1 extra year. So normally high school is done in grade 11. He would be going to grade 12 in Canada, so I figured just take the extra year. And of course, if it didn't work out, we could always not do the advanced class. I think it's accounting, and then there's some type of engineering something. I can't remember what that second one is. And then the last one is just general. And that's what Lawrence would take if he were to go into high school next year. But we asked for Lawrence to be held back a year because he's really behind in his math and the language. We want them to have a better chance of passing properly. We don't want him to take on grade 10 math when he doesn't even know grade 9 math. So because Willem is in that advanced program, it's not just one extra year on school. He would actually go on Saturdays, and those classes were 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. every Saturday morning. And that's the day that I volunteered to teach English at the school. As I had to go drop him off and pick him up anyway, I could just stay at school and do something productive, like teach people English. So my observations, are the teachers communicative? In general, no. My biggest gripe about the whole school is this. I didn't know there was a parents' WhatsApp group for all the classes until August, when for the second time I had to go to pick up Annika at school because the school bus driver took her to school, but there were no classes for grade 4 that day. I was pretty pissed that second time I went, and that's when I found out there was a parent WhatsApp group where I could have been notified that there was no school and therefore made sure she didn't get on the bus. So that annoyed me because that wasn't until August and school started in January. Not all teachers are the same, as I was part of the Lawrence's group right away. And I found out about Willem's group. Willem's group is different because it's an interactive group, where Annika's and Lawrence's group, it's just admin only can send messages, so we're just basically given notices. But in Willem's group, it's interactive. I can ask questions, which was great because I didn't get added to it until about maybe April, but it was great that I could ask questions like, is there school tomorrow? Annika's, like I said, was the last one I got added to, and her teacher already was very non-communicative. One of my meetings I went there, I asked him for his WhatsApp number. He was saying he didn't want to give out his number because in the past, parents text him at all hours of the night. So I thought all along he wasn't even going to give us a number, only to find out that there was a group all this time that I didn't know I was supposed to be part of. So that kind of ticked me off. But now that we get through the growing pains of the first year, next year will be much better, right? And one time Annika even texted me to say that the principal had kind of put her on a bus and they were going on a field trip that I didn't know about and I hadn't given any consent for. I didn't know if I had to give a consent for, but no form came home for me to sign. One time, Lawrence went on a field trip and he did bring home a permission slip and I signed it for him to go. So I don't know if that was supposed to be for every field trip. I don't know. And they actually went to the library, which was great. She took a bunch of pictures and video of them at the library downtown, which we'd already gone to as a family a couple times. So we're familiar with the place. But again, communication, not a strong point. But I'm hoping with the new Ministry of Education, that gets better because ever since she took over, we're getting way more notices in all the groups than we ever had before. I'm not used to kids not bringing home papers for notes. That's a thing in Canada. You always came home with a note or you wrote something in your agenda. But when you have to pay 10 cents to take a paper test, I can imagine why they don't send paper home as notes. And then one time, I was cleaning out Lawrence's backpack a couple weeks ago. I found a notice in there to bring the birth certificates in. I think the notice was sent in March. Now, I don't even have the kids' birth certificates because if you remember from my initial temporary residency video, I stated that immigration keeps the birth certificates. So I don't have the long form. I only have the short form ones. And I actually believe we brought those the day we enrolled the kids in school and they took a photocopy. So anyway, I only got it like in October and it was sent home in his backpack in March. So there's good things to be said about paper and not good things to be said about paper if your kids aren't good at giving you the notes, right? So if your kids are going to be going to public school here, ask to be put in those groups right away. We never had this in Canada. The principal or teacher would send us an email or, like I said, the notes in the backpack, but they don't do email here. I don't even know if they have my email address. So how is administration handled? Well, all public school administration is actually handled in San Salvador by MIND, which is the Ministry of Education in El Salvador. Is the education more traditional or modern? I'd say it's definitely more modern in the sense that Willem only had 2 textbooks. All of Willem's assignments were given to him in Google Classroom, and that's how all of his assignments are delivered and graded is through Google Classroom. So that's pretty modern for us. We're not used to that. Anyway, long story short, I get a notification saying what's missed. He goes and looks at them. Sometimes they're not really missed. They're just not checked off that they're done. It's a way for the parents to keep up with what the kids' work is. I'm not used to that. Like in Canada, I honestly didn't know what he was bringing home or had to have done. He just did his homework and went to school. I didn't have to keep track of it. Now I'm actually on a list every week to get his assignments. So that definitely is way more modern than I was used to. And also the WhatsApp groups are nice, where they are interactive anyway with Willem's one, because you get to hear from the other parents too. Like I said, Annika's and Lawrence's groups are just administrator only groups, but you can go in there and you can get the teacher's phone number and email them, which I had done over October when Willem mentioned they were home for a week doing homeschool because there was a risk of flooding. I was able to reach out to the teachers and send assignments in through WhatsApp, take a picture of it, send it to the teacher kind of thing. And the other thing that annoyed me about Annika's teacher is they talk so quietly that even when I was in the parent meetings and I sat in the front row, my Google translator could not pick up what he was saying. And the first 2 meetings, he would not even, like I said, give us his WhatsApp number. So there's no way to communicate with this guy at all. That really, really annoyed me. When I was added to the parent group, I could see his phone number. I could text him after that. But, to be honest, I did not care much for him. I think that's another reason why Annika had such trouble in this class. I know she kind of mentions that the teachers are uncaring. She only had the one teacher, and I didn't care much for him. It's just one out of, I don't know how many teachers are there. I'm hoping that grade 5 goes better for her with a much better, more attentive teacher. And I hope to get into the parent meetings at the very beginning and build a rapport with her new teacher and just go over some of the issues that Annika had this past year to try to address them right away. And maybe even the teacher can help pair Annika up with another student that maybe she can become friends with even, at the beginning of the year. Who knows? Lawrence's teacher was super nice. I loved him. He was great, and so were Willem's. And when the parent meetings for Willem's class, it was all about suicide prevention. And they had an activity, they had like a speaker, they had an activity, and we all had to write something on a Post-it note. And then we had to get up and present it, stand up and read it, and then they put it on the board. So I did that. I felt like I was, part of everyone, even though I didn't understand everything, but Google Translate's pretty good. I just find there's a lot of slang in El Salvador, and sometimes the message doesn't convey very well. But overall, I actually understood most of it, and I understand about suicide prevention. Anyway, I was familiar with the topic. That really helps if you're familiar with what you understand the context of the situation. In Willem's parent meetings and also the other kids' parent meetings, the high schoolers have these community hours that they have to do to graduate. So in the parent meetings, they help out by either assigning people in or distributing the textbooks or whatever. They're always there to help out. But in Willem's, I found really interesting because they were always super respectful when I came to the class. They were like, oh, you're Willem's mom, and they'd write stuff down, that I arrived or whatever, and tell me where I had to sign and whatever. It was really nice. Oh, I also forgot about the shoes were also given out at one of the meetings as well. I forgot about shoes. Uniforms, shoes, laptops, the math sets, textbooks. Yeah, it was a lot of stuff given out. We had a lot of parent meetings actually throughout the year. So that's what the high schoolers help with. They help distribute those things or go get, a box of textbooks, bring it to the right class. And like I said, Willem's class was always great. They're always really respectful to me. I really enjoyed dealing with the high schoolers when I went to his meetings. Now for student health, in August there was a notice that the school was giving out HPV vaccines, which I am adamantly against. I didn't sign any permission slip, and in fact, I kept my kids home the day that the nurses were to arrive to give these vaccines. Unfortunately, the nurses got delayed, and we were not sure what day they would be arriving at the school. So during a morning later on that week, my daughter texted me to tell me that I would have to inform a teacher or the principal that none of them were allowed to take these vaccines. So I typed up a message and translated it in Spanish. I sent it to the principal, and he was fine with it. I didn't have to do anything else. I didn't have to show up with some sort of proof or consult a priest or anything ridiculous like that I would have had to do in Canada. No, I just sent it and I said my kids cannot get these vaccines. It was great. And when my kids start school here, I was not required to show their vaccine records, which is good because they accidentally got forgotten in Canada and they didn't arrive until my husband went back. So I didn't have them anyway. Now, about the parking lot. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that we were fundraising at the very beginning of the school year for a new parking lot for the kids. With all of your support, we were able to make that a reality. Unfortunately, shortly after we got the substrate donated by the crew that was doing the highway, they dug up a trench in front of the gate, and then we could no longer get into the parking lot. And actually, school ended early this week because they have dug up almost everything. Now you almost cannot access the school except a narrow path to the main door of the school. So they didn't want the kids and the buses and stuff coming with all this heavy machinery and crew. And there's big pits dug out for drainage systems that they're going to be putting in down the side. I think they're doing a bike path or something too. Somebody mentioned in one of the notices we got. So, but for next year, when they start school, that parking lot's all finished and it's making it so much safer. The kids actually used it a bit before there was substrate on it, but it was just dirt. So if it was raining the night before and it was really soft, it was just really messy for the buses and stuff to get in. They're making all kinds of potholes and stuff. So they barely got to use it when the substrate was put on, but next year it's all ready for them to go. And then the buses will pull in and the kids will get off inside the schoolyard instead of along the highway. I think they might even be able to make a pedestrian pass, I think I saw, from each side of the highway, because that's a really dangerous spot, and it's going to be 4 lanes each side, so you don't want kids crossing 8 lanes of traffic to go from one side to the other. So they're going to be putting a pedestrian bridge, that's what I'm told. And we're so glad we got the substrate donated because we didn't quite have enough money left over for I don't know how many dump truck loads it would have taken to fill it with gravel. So we have $586.34 left. So when school resumes in January, I'm going to donate the rest of that money to the student lunch program, because at one of the parent meetings, the principal said that they ran out of money because I guess not every family had given the $10 per child kind of thing, because there's 900 students. So if $10 per child, that's like $9,000. That would pay the wages and the food for the people that do the cooking. I think it's also for like an admin assistant or someone. I think he mentioned 3 salaries are paid out of that money, and not every parent could do that. So I'm going to donate the money for that because, again, this is a bit of a poor area, and not every parent can afford $10 per child to give to the school when that's $20 for someone that has 2 kids. That's a day's wages. So I'm going to donate that money for the lunch program when school starts up in January. I will be letting you know more about that when I do that. The future looks very bright in El Salvador. President Bukele gave a speech the other day inaugurating 70 new or refurbished schools across El Salvador as part of the 2 schools a day program. Now, if you don't know what 2 schools a day is, our president is renovating or building 2 new schools every day. Now, every day that goes by, you can check the website to see which 2 schools have started. Now, there are over like 300 in construction right now, and 70 have been completed. And the children actually could return this week. Now, albeit it's the end of the school year, so I bet they're really looking forward to going to school next year, or to summer school if they have to go if they're falling behind. Now, while schools are being built, the children are doing learning from home using the Google Classroom I mentioned with their laptops or tablets. Now, our housekeeper's son actually was one of those children. What really baffled me about Bukele's first speech on the 2 schools a day program was when he was showing some pictures of the before pictures of the schools, and he explained that when he took office, he inherited some schools that were really falling into disrepair. But sadly, he also inherited some schools that had like thatched roofs, thatched walls, dirt floor, no running water, no electricity, no bathrooms, that were built that way on purpose. On purpose. They did not fall into disrepair. They were built that way on purpose. I know my jaw dropped, like it just blew my mind. You know, our kids' school isn't in that great a shape, but these schools were much worse. And in his latest speech, he was actually inaugurating a school that had been knocked down by an earthquake 40 years ago. And all of these past 40 years, no administration thought, oh, I should fix that school, right? El Salvador has over 5,125 schools, and even with 2 schools a day, it would take 7 years to rebuild all the schools. So my boys may not see the benefit to their school, but Annika would. And Bukele reminded everyone that every student in El Salvador can get a full scholarship to university or college. There is a little qualifying program that they have to do first, and depending on how far they go in that, it depends if they're going to get into college or university. And it's about working hard and taking an interest in your education, not just the highest grades. So this is a great opportunity. I don't know when or if Canada has ever inaugurated 70 schools in 1 year. I mean, like probably never. And the government does not give out free post-secondary education in Canada either. So I hope you enjoyed our video on our first year with our kids in school here. I know nothing is perfect, and we are going to be helping the kids more with the language because we hope next year is even better and that they continue to learn over the summer break with their friends in our community, and a couple other things I have up my sleeve to help them get their language to perfection. See you in the next one.
Don't forget to hit the like button.